Imagine a place where the walls don't just keep people in, but keep secrets hidden. A place where the line between captor and captive blurs with each passing day. This is the story of a guard who found himself locked in a situation that would forever change his understanding of freedom, duty, and what it truly means to be imprisoned. My name is Alex Mercer, and for the past 7 years, I've worked as a corrections officer at Blackwood Detention Facility, a high-security prison nestled in the remote mountains, far from prying eyes and public scrutiny. What happened during those 48 hours of lockdown last winter wasn't just a security incident. It was a revelation that unlocked something I never expected to find behind those reinforced walls. Let me take you inside Blackwood, a place few ever see and even fewer understand. From the outside, it resembles a fortress more than a correctional facility. Concrete walls rising 30 feet high, topped with razor wire that glints menacingly in the sunlight. Guard towers positioned at each corner house officers with high-powered rifles, their eyes constantly scanning the perimeter. The facility itself is divided into 4 wings, each with increasing security protocols. The maximum security wing, where I was stationed, houses inmates deemed too dangerous for standard incarceration, violent offenders, gang leaders, and those with multiple escape attempts on their records. The security measures at Blackwood go beyond physical barriers. Every door requires biometric authentication. Every corridor is monitored by cameras feeding into a central command center. Guards like me carry specialized radios with panic buttons, and we undergo monthly drills for everything from medical emergencies to full-scale riots. But here's what they don't tell you in training. No amount of technology or protocols can prepare you for the psychological reality of working in a place designed to contain human beings against their will. The constant tension, the unspoken power dynamics, the way the environment changes you, slowly, imperceptibly, until one day you realize you've become someone you don't recognize. Before I tell you about the incident that changed everything, you should know about the people involved. There's Warden Pierce, a former military man who runs Blackwood with cold efficiency. He believes in discipline above all else and views rehabilitation as a luxury the system can't afford. Then there's Officer Rodriguez, my supervisor, who's been working corrections for 20 years and wears his cynicism like armor. Among the inmates, there's Marcus Wilson, serving 25 to life for armed robbery that resulted in a death he claims was accidental. Unlike many others, Marcus maintains a quiet dignity that's earned him a measure of respect from both inmates and guards. And finally, there's me, a guard who took the job for the stability and benefits, never expecting it to become a crucible that would test everything I believed about justice, redemption, and my own capacity for compassion. It began on a Tuesday morning in January, during the coldest winter on record. The facility had been on edge for weeks due to understaffing and budget cuts that had resulted in fewer programs for inmates and longer shifts for guards. I remember the tension in the air that morning, thick enough to cut with a knife. During breakfast, a fight broke out between 2 rival gang members in the cafeteria. Standard procedure, nothing we hadn't handled before. But this time was different. As we moved to separate the inmates, someone shouted that an officer was down. In the confusion that followed, the alarm was triggered, and Blackwood went into immediate lockdown. Let me explain what lockdown means at a facility like Blackwood. All inmates are confined to their cells. All movement within the facility ceases. All external communications are cut. Guards are stationed at strategic points throughout the building, and no one enters or leaves until the all-clear is given. What should have been a routine procedure turned into something else entirely when we discovered that the officer down report was false, but not before we realized that something was missing from the medical supply room. Prescription narcotics, enough to be valuable on the inside or outside. And just like that, what started as a standard response became a full investigation, with all staff and inmates confined within Blackwood's walls until the missing drugs were found. I was assigned to D Block, the maximum security wing, where tensions were already running high. Inmates who had been promised yard time now faced indefinite confinement in their cells. The air conditioning system, temperamental at the best of times, had begun to fail in certain sections, leaving some cells uncomfortably hot while others grew cold. As hours stretched into a full day with no resolution, I began making my rounds, checking cells, trying to maintain some semblance of routine in a situation that was anything but routine. It was during these rounds that I first noticed something odd about Marcus Wilson's behavior. Usually calm and reserved, he seemed agitated, constantly watching the guard's movements, making notes in a small journal he kept. When I approached his cell to ask about it, he quickly hid the journal, but not before I caught a glimpse of what looked like a map. Protocol dictated that I report this immediately, search his cell, confiscate the journal. But something made me hesitate. Perhaps it was the look in his eyes, not fear or defiance, but a quiet determination that spoke of something beyond the immediate circumstances. That night, as the lockdown continued into its second day, I was making a final check before the shift change when the power went out. Emergency generators kicked in almost immediately, but in those few seconds of darkness, I heard a cell door open, something that should have been impossible during a power failure, as the electronic locks were designed to remain engaged when power was cut. By the time the lights came back on, Marcus Wilson was standing in the corridor, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "I need to show you something," he said. "Something that's been locked up for too long." Every instinct and protocol demanded that I restrain him, call for backup, return him to his cell. Instead, I found myself listening as he explained that the lockdown had provided the perfect opportunity to expose corruption that had been festering within Blackwood for years. His journal wasn't a map for escape. It was documentation of a smuggling operation involving several guards and the warden himself. Prescription drugs were just the tip of the iceberg. There was evidence of bribes, falsified records, and inmates being used as pawns in a profitable enterprise that extended well beyond the prison walls. "Why show me?" I asked, aware that every second I stood listening rather than sounding the alarm was a violation of everything my job represented. "Because you're the only one who still sees us as people," he answered simply. In that moment, I faced the most difficult decision of my career, perhaps my life. Report Wilson and maintain the system that kept him locked up, or listen to what he had to say and potentially unlock a truth that many wanted to remain hidden. What followed was a careful, tense collaboration as Wilson guided me through the evidence he'd gathered over years of patient observation. Names, dates, drop locations, all meticulously documented by a man who had nothing but time and a keen eye for detail. As we pieced together the extent of the corruption, I began to understand the true nature of what was locked up at Blackwood. Yes, there were dangerous individuals who had committed serious crimes. But there was also a system that profited from their continued incarceration, that treated rehabilitation as an inconvenience rather than a goal, that viewed inmates as inventory rather than human beings capable of change. And I had been a part of that system, enforcing its rules without questioning its purpose. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I had locked myself into a role, a perspective that allowed me to do my job without confronting the moral complexities it entailed. I had separated myself from the inmates by focusing on their crimes rather than their humanity. In doing so, I had imprisoned a part of myself, my capacity for empathy, for seeing beyond labels and circumstances to the person underneath. By the early hours of the morning, as the facility remained in lockdown, Wilson and I had compiled enough evidence to take to external authorities. But getting that information out of Blackwood during a lockdown presented its own challenges. And there was the very real danger that those involved in the corruption would go to extreme lengths to prevent exposure. We needed allies, but in an environment built on suspicion and power imbalances, trust was the scarcest commodity of all. We found an unexpected ally in Officer Rodriguez, my cynical supervisor. When approached with the evidence, he revealed that he had harbored suspicions for years but lacked the proof needed to act. His cynicism, it turned out, wasn't directed at the inmates, but at a system he had watched deteriorate over 2 decades. With his help, we developed a plan to secure the evidence and ensure it reached the proper authorities once the lockdown was lifted. The breaking point came on the 3rd day of lockdown. The missing drugs had been found in the cell of an inmate known for his repeated complaints about staff misconduct, an obvious attempt to close the investigation with a convenient scapegoat. As preparations were made to end the lockdown and return to normal operations, Warden Pierce called a staff meeting to commend everyone on their handling of the situation. Standing in that room, listening to hollow praise from a man I now knew to be corrupt to the core, I felt something shift inside me. The lock that had kept my doubts and questions contained broke open. When the warden finished speaking and asked if there were any questions, I found myself stepping forward. "I have evidence of misconduct and corruption involving several staff members and yourself, sir," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I believe this should be investigated before normal operations resume." The silence that followed was deafening. Then came the expected response: accusations of insubordination, threats of termination, demands for immediate retraction. But I wasn't alone. Rodriguez stepped forward, then another officer, and another. Not everyone, but enough to make it clear that the truth had allies. What followed was a chaotic period of internal investigations, external oversight, and profound change within Blackwood. Several staff members, including the warden, were removed pending criminal charges. Security protocols were reviewed and revised. Most significantly, there was a renewed focus on the purpose of incarceration, not just punishment, but the possibility of rehabilitation and reintegration. For Marcus Wilson, his role in exposing the corruption led to a review of his case. While his conviction stood, his cooperation and the circumstances of the original crime resulted in a reduced sentence with the possibility of parole. For me, the aftermath brought both professional challenges and personal growth. Some colleagues viewed me as a traitor to the uniform. Others expressed relief that long-suspected issues had finally been addressed. I remained at Blackwood, believing that change could only come from within, from people committed to doing the job with integrity and humanity. The most profound change, however, was internal. I had entered the corrections system seeing it in black and white, officers and inmates, right and wrong, us and them. What I came to understand through that lockdown was the complexity of human behavior, the power of systemic influences, and the potential for growth and change that exists in everyone, regardless of their circumstances or past actions. Let me be clear, this isn't a story about a corrupt system or bad people. It's a story about what happens when we lock away our questions, our doubts, our capacity to see beyond labels and roles. It's about what can be unlocked when we have the courage to challenge not just others, but ourselves. In a place designed to keep people in and keep others out, the most important barriers that came down were the ones I had built within myself. So what does this mean for you listening to this story? Perhaps you're not a corrections officer facing corruption in a high-security facility. But we all build prisons of perception, assumptions that lock us into limited understanding of others and ourselves. We all face moments when following the established protocol conflicts with our deeper sense of what's right. And we all have the capacity to unlock new possibilities through the choices we make in those moments. The guard locked up, not just inmates in cells, but doubts and questions behind professional detachment. And in doing so, unlocked something else. The recognition that true security comes not from walls and protocols, but from integrity, compassion, and the courage to stand for what's right, even when it's difficult. Especially when it's difficult. As I continue my work at Blackwood, now under new leadership and with renewed purpose, I carry this understanding with me. Each day presents opportunities to see beyond the uniform I wear and the uniforms others wear, whether literal or figurative. Each interaction offers the chance to recognize the humanity in others and in myself. And each choice I make either reinforces the locks of limitation or opens doors to new possibilities. What will you choose to lock up, and what will you unlock? The answer to that question shapes not just your own life, but the world we create together. Remember, the strongest prisons are often the ones we build ourselves, and the most important keys are the ones we discover within. Total _char_count, 13,572.